A love story that should have lasted a lifetime and the one decision that destroyed it all. Now, how many people have to have the greatest tragedies of their lives so that two people can have the greatest love of their lives? And today's book is The Pursuit of Happiness by Douglas Kennedy. Now, I'm rereading my library and making that decision as to which books I'm going to keep and which ones I'm going to let go. And I hadn't read this one for quite a while. This story opens up on Kate's perspective. She's just buried her mother. Her father died when she was a wee baby. And that night, a glamorous older lady called Sarah comes to visit, who tells her that the father, Jack, was actually the greatest love of her life. And so she leaves behind a manuscript for Kate to read of the life of her and Jack. So then the novel moves to Sarah's perspective. In 1945, just after the war has ended, Jack is about to go back to Europe, where he works as a journalist. And Sarah and Jack meet and have the most passionate love affair of 24 hours, declaring their undying love for each other. And as Jack is being shipped out, Sarah and Jack promise to write to each other every day. It's only going to be for 5 months after all. Sarah writes every day, and then eventually she receives a letter from Jack saying, "I am sorry." 3 simple words that broke her heart. She learns how to pick up the pieces after this rather upsetting news. She ends up having a literary career. She marries badly, mostly because she got blackmailed into it by mother-in-law because she was pregnant, and that is just not how you do things in 1940s society in America. Mother-in-law basically blackmails her to leave the husband, gives her a whole wodge of money, and Sarah gets on with her life. And then she reunites with Jack and discovers that he'd also ended up in a tragic marriage because he got the girl pregnant a few weeks before he met Sarah. So they embark on their great love. They basically have 2 days a week together, and then the rest of the week Jack goes home to his family. So things carry on for a number of years with Jack living this double life. And then Sarah's brother gets called up in front of the house of, now let me get this right because it's always been a bit of a mouthful to me on how to pronounce this one. House of Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC. House of Un-American Activities Committee, which most of us know colloquially as the McCarthy witch hunts. So Sarah's brother is a very flamboyant writer for the new television world that's starting to come. He writes for a comedy show, and he's been outed as a communist, of which he was very briefly about 9 years ago. He refuses to name any names, so he ends up being fired, and he gets fired because he's gay, not because of this communism thing. And Sarah gets fired because her brother is gay. Her brother Eric actually then drinks himself to an early grave. A few years later, Sarah finds out that it was Jack who was the one who gave up Eric's name. Everything falls apart. Her world implodes, and she basically refuses to ever see Jack. He basically dies of a broken heart. And then so what we're having now is 40 years later, Kate is discovering the impact that Sarah has had on her particular life. There's a lot to unpack in this book. The first thing that I kind of noticed was society in the 1940s of America, and how rigid and parochial and insular, and just how awful it would have been to have been a woman who wanted to live a single life. A woman who wanted to live a life according to her own terms, not what her father dictated, and certainly not what this dragon of a mother-in-law dictated for her. So I found that kind of, looking at that from eyes 80 years later, was kind of really, wow, what the hell have women been through all these years to get to where we are now? And please, what is going on in all this world at the moment, and these right-wing movements wanting to take women back to that era? I don't think so, and we need to stop. We need to keep speaking about this, and because, you know, it's fully in men's interest to go back to that, but it's not in the women's interest. So let's kind of, you know, that's enough of that subject. So this writer, Douglas Kennedy, he's actually known as the greatest American writer that Americans have never heard of. He moved to Europe when he was at university age, and he studied history. And so you can tell that he knows history because of the way he writes and the detail, and it's correct, and it's just beautifully written, and all this richness that I did not really like in the John Irving, but I do like in this novel. He goes into great detail on what it was like for this House of Un-Americans Activity Committee. I mean, what a mouthful, seriously. What it was like for people, and because I'm sort of in the entertainment industry, I've paid attention to how it affected a lot of people in the entertainment industry over the years. This talked a lot about what it was like to work as a writer on a successful TV comedy show in the early days of TV. And so to get it from the perspective of a man who has lived a flamboyant, glamorous, spending up large, out there gay person without being obvious about it. And everyone knew he was gay and didn't have a problem with this until this committee turned up and the FBI kind of persecuted him, and just how he was not emotionally equipped to dealing with this. But he stood firm in his resolve and he wasn't going to name names. And he was prepared to go to jail for this, but eventually goes, I'm going to drink myself to death, which is kind of what he does. And then there was the whole watching people just doing their job and following their orders and destroying people's lives. And, hello, are we seeing that happening as well? So it was like a runaway train trying to cross a canyon via a broken bridge. Yeah, the similarities of then and now were kind of marked. And so then you get to the tragedies of this story when you've got the greatest love story for these two people ever happening. If Sarah and Jack hadn't have met, then Jack wouldn't have met Eric and he wouldn't have outed him. And he only outed him in huge pressure. He'd tried to out a whole bunch of other names that were already outed to the committee and they wouldn't accept it, and they kept pushing and they kept pushing. So he blurted out Eric's name. That would never have happened if these two hadn't have been having their great love story. The kind of irony, I don't know, there's a word that I have trouble remembering words, but there's a word that explains all of this. And I have to wonder, that saying, is it better to have loved than to have never loved at all? Do we love without worrying about the consequences that our love is going to have on other people? Or do we stifle ourselves so that we don't have a negative impact on other people? And that's a question for the ages. Now, I had my great love of my life in my early 20s when I met him a couple of months before he was about to embark on an 8-month journey, a bit similar to our lead characters. But we did have correspondence, and then suddenly I got a telegram saying, don't come. I was 10 days away from flying out to meet him. And I went into all the kind of rationalizations and excuses and something's gone wrong and blah, 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 blah. And I went away skiing because I had to use the money for the trip. And on my last day, I went, oh my God, he met someone else. I mean, it took literally a month for me to figure that out. Then I went into that whole spiral that you get into when you don't have any information, when you're living in a vacuum. And eventually I got a letter basically saying, oh yeah, I met someone else and I didn't want you coming down, encountering one thing and expecting another. And it was a brief half-page letter, and that's the only line I've remembered. It took me years to get over him. And for a long time, all of my friends knew of him as John the Bastard. And now I just call him the great love of my life. And there hasn't been another one since. And so this explains why this story kind of resonated for me initially. And then it went off onto that whole other trail of just kind of crazy with, and this is my favourite word of the day, crazy. Is this a stay or a let go? I'm going to let it go because this is a really important novel. And I think some other people need to hear about this story. I don't know how many people know about the McCarthyism era, and I certainly think it would be useful for more people to learn about that. So I'm going to send it off. I do feel that this book has helped me to reconcile a lot of stuff that I've been hanging on to, so it's done its job in that sense. It was a great read, which is also another sense. So I really do think someone else is going to love this and get a little bit of passive learning along the way. And I mean, that's why I read books, because, I'm just like a sponge. I like to learn stuff. I mean, I'm nosy. I call it an innate curiosity about the world. I'm not going to lose this author because I've probably got about 10 of his books or more on my Kindle, and they are a great read. And I'll see you next time.